Hey, this is Adrian Shepard, and just before we get into our interview, I just wanted to make a couple things clear. Now, we discuss a lot of issues related to pan-secession in this interview. I want to make it clear, though, that Gunther is not exactly on our side 100% by any means when it comes to our ideas about full autonomy for all peoples. I did think it was worth interviewing him because anyone discussing on any level, even if it's a singular advocacy of an ethnic liberation, or in Gunther's case, it's ethnic liberation for authoritarian regimes only and not for what he sees as the free world. Any of these advocates, I think, are allies of ours in our fight for 1,000 Liechtensteins, 1,000,000 states, every man a king. And so that's why I thought it was worth interviewing him, even though it's quite obvious that while he's a liberal, he is still someone who kind of recoils from a full autonomy of all peoples. But with that said, I think this was a very interesting and elucidating interview. So with that said, we'll get right to it. This is Adrian Shepard with Springtime of Nations, and I'm here with a very interesting personality, Gunther Fehlinger. He is an Austrian businessman. You're the president of the Europeans for Tax Reform, but I think a lot of people know you as the Twitter personality. You have a very funny and engaging way of talking about foreign policy for the EU and for OECD. You have a very interesting idea called the Fehlinger Doctrine relating to what you see as opponents of a liberal order and civil liberties, etc. So how about you lay out, which I think you would probably say, at least in terms of your online presence is kind of the most important thing right now, your Fehlinger Doctrine.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very honored that I can participate. Springtime of the Nations. That's a very good title, and I agree. It's now time for more nations to be free. And that's basically also what the Fehlinger Doctrine is about. Because since the fall of the Soviet Union 30 years ago and the victory of the West and the free world in the Cold War, we have really liberated a lot of nations in the world. Let's say Kosovo, Bosnia, let's say also Croatia, Ukraine, and Latvia, and all these countries which have emerged out of the Soviet Union and ex-Yugoslavia and the ex-Soviet Union and the ex-Warsaw Pact. They have been very successful, and many of them are already fully integrated in the free world, and more of them will be in the future. So what is the Fehlinger Doctrine? Yeah, more of the same, basically. It's completely legitimate that countries and nations which are in so-called prisons of nations, like the current Russian Federation, but also like Syria, like Iran and others, that they aspire to break away from these centralistic dictatorships, authoritarian kleptocratic systems, and then they will repeat the success stories of Latvia, of Croatia, and many others in the last 30 years, and they join the free world as new emerging new states and also as market democracies. This is basically, in a nutshell, the Fehlinger Doctrine.
And I love the way you phrase that, prisons for nations. We've used the term captive nations when we talk about a lot of these places, and like the Kurds, for example. You brought up Syria. There's you have the Azeris in Iran, which are captive. You have Kurds there as well, Arabs, and we can go down the list. All these, you talk a lot about the BRICS countries. All of these are very large, centralized states, which don't really grant freedom or much freedom to, their constituent nations. It's kind of what you might call a Herrenvolk democracy, right? You have, there's the Russians dominate the Russian Federation, the Hindus dominate India, and on and on. I have noticed when you talk about the Fehlinger Doctrine, obviously you talk a lot about countries all over the world, but you seem to focus a lot on the Balkans, and you seem to be posting a lot there. It seems like you visit there quite a bit. Just out of curiosity, how did you really get in, fall in love with the Balkans, basically? You seem to always...
Let's call it the former ex-Austria or the former ex-Ottoman area. So it's a prime example for my doctrine. How I personally, because all these countries work now much better than being part of the Ottoman or of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. They were part of that. They were for a short and tragic time also part of the Italian or the Bulgarian or the Nazi Empire in the Second World War. And mostly they were part of the Yugoslavian and of the Soviet Empire then later during the Cold War. And this was all quite unfortunate and even tragic history for these people. And now how I personally got involved, I'm an Austrian of the generation of the 68. I'm now 55. I was just a young adult and a military officer in Austria when everything started to break up and to be a much better world next to me in the East. Yeah. And I was basically trained to fear the East and the communist takeover to be imminent. Yeah, in Austria, we were the border state to Czechoslovakia, to communist Hungary, and to socialist Yugoslavia. It's like a big, gigantic free world bridge into the communist-occupied Europe. And then suddenly it all turned basically great. And all these people liberated themselves from the communist yoke. And I was very happy to participate as a student activist. I was a student leader in Austria in the 90s and a European student leader as EDS from the Democratic side, from the EPP side, basically, center-right. I was there traveling the whole 90s through all of these countries and celebrating the freedom of these nations and promoting their membership in the European Union and in NATO and later the Euro. And this is basically my story about it. And later as a professional, I was then in the European Parliament as advisor for Austrian MEP and also in the so-called SME Union of the EPP, also doing the same and promoting the membership of the European Union and of NATO, especially in the decisive years after September 11 towards the Big Bang enlargement in 2004, where we brought so many new countries into NATO and EU. It's still the most historic year we have. And I hope we can repeat next year and in the coming years a similar wave of enlargement. And that was really amazing for me. And later as a professional, I worked as a technical advisor for many of the governments of Southeastern Europe, in Kosovo, in Albania, in Montenegro, in Ukraine. And I have done that as a professional then the last 15 years to advise them how to integrate faster into the European Union. Mostly my specialty is economics and the policies for small and medium enterprises, how to transform the economic system. And now basically since 2014, but intensively and really like a lot of effort also in the public profile. It's also since the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine, and it's basically the war which Russia is waging against all of us. And all my public effort is now for more unity of Europe, for faster enlargement of NATO, EU and the Euro, OECD and all our institutions, and really to win this war. Also institutionally, but obviously also militarily. I'm always calling as well for more weapons and more money for Ukraine. But it's not only the military side we have to win. We need to win the war as well institutionally. And that's my specific contribution. I want to make clear that Ukraine wants to join NATO, should join NATO, EU and the Euro, and all the countries in between and around who want to join us. Absolutely, let's integrate them and we settle and solve all the issues on the way, as we have done successfully done in the past with 100 million people, which we brought successfully in the European Union in the last 20 years. And there will be 70 million more people coming from Ukraine and the Balkans, Moldova and Georgia, and maybe some more. And that's our task. That's why we have these institutions developed after World War II. NATO and EU, we have developed them for the stability, security of free Europe. Now free Europe is a bit bigger because we were very successful and Russia is withdrawing. And that's something we should do faster. basically to integrate this country into our institutions. And that's very good for them and very good for us. And it's also one way to win this war institutionally. But nevertheless, we also need to win it militarily. So more weapons, more money for Ukraine is very important.
Right. Well, we'll tackle Ukraine in a second. I just have a question. So you mentioned that you are working a lot with the EPP, a lot with your advisory roles. The EPP member in Austria obviously is the Austrian People's Party. I've noticed that you've been somewhat critical of the OBP's policies recently. Would you say that you're still of that kind of political milieu? I noticed that there's maybe another party in Austria which you might find a little more interesting, but I wanted to ask you, like that semi-new Neos party. Would you say you're more in line with them, or are you still a OBP Old Guard?
Look, it's like this. I'm still a normal center right-wing European, a conservative, economically liberal of the 2000 generation. It's just that some of the EPP parties have moved into the populist line of the Trumpist area. And that is something I condemn, and I see that as a tragic mistake. After 2015 and 16, with the whole immigration crisis and the Trumpian rise, many of the parties, they found it tempting to go into this trap of populism. And I'm absolutely against that. Today, I'm in no party. I'm just an activist. Yeah, I'm not politically in a party organized, but I'm a very political person, and I use Twitter and my YouTube channel to promote my political views, which I think are very reasonable and which also the ÖVP and the NEO should have. But unfortunately, we have a party, and we have also the NEOs, not a single party in Austria. Nobody in the parliament is supporting NATO integration of Austria. It's a big shock, yeah? And there is a lot of populism in Austria today. For example, the Austrian People's Party and the Green, they are part of the government. They form the government now. They want to bring an extradite, pushback, how you call it now, to expatriate a 16-year-old Georgian boy who is sick of cancer. They want to send him back to Georgia. This is very inhumane and had nothing to do with liberalism, Christianity, or center right-wing or liberal values or green values or whatever you have. It's simply very, very negative tendencies which our societies have been going at least in the last 5 years. And since I returned from Ukraine in 2020, I stand my positions, or to publish my positions more on Twitter. And I say, we must fight protectionism, anti-Semitism, all these xenophobic tendencies. Yeah, we must be more united in the West, based on openness, on reasonable respect for human rights and for property rights, and also for what we always thought as open societies, which made America and Europe rich. Yeah? A reasonable approach towards governance in terms of openness, of course, regulated openness, but not this kind of populist protectionism, xenophobic mixture, this toxic mixture which Mr. Trump and Putin are promoting all over Europe. And this is unfortunate that some in the ÖVP and some in the NEOs and some in all parties in Austria, because I'm not happy with any of them, have gone in that tragic direction. And so I prefer NEOs. It's also the party I voted the last time. But I'm still very close from the milieu, if you want to say it like this, to the Austrian People's Party, because most of my friends are there, to be honest, even when some of them don't like me. But that's my upbringing, basically. But when you ask me which party I'm happy in Austria, not a single one.
And you would also probably say you're not really a fan of the traditional Austrian position in Europe, at least post-World War II, which was kind of a guarded neutrality. And I definitely think it makes sense from your perspective to oppose that. But I wonder if you have a good argument. So in 1955, obviously, this became part of the constitutional order of Austria. Now, as I understand it, that was sort of a compromise with the East, right, to lower tensions. Obviously, the Soviets had occupied part of, the Soviets had occupied a part of Austria and were administrating it, and you could see the 55 policy neutrality is sort of like a way to get the Soviets to leave and give Austria autonomy while also, not provoking them or raising tensions with them or creating, which I think would have been an unfortunate thing, a kind of East Austria, like we had East Germany. What do you think about the prudence of it at that time? Do you think that changed in 91, or were you always basically against the idea of a neutral?
No, in 1955 I was not alive because I was not born I was just born 68, but I would have opposed it back then as well. But here's the thing, why it happened. I want to explain it to your audience. It was basically a dirty deal, and the Soviet Union has blackmailed the Austrian leadership and the Americans at that moment. Yeah? Why? It was all about German neutrality, because Stalin died in 1953, but his successors and himself as well from the 50s onwards, he wanted to neutralize Germany. That was the big idea. The big strategic idea was from Sweden to Germany, Austria, Yugoslavia, Greece, Turkey, to have a neutral belt between Western Europe and Soviet Central Europe. That was the idea. It didn't work out in the case of Germany because, that was something which would have been a disaster, actually. And neutralized Germany, then basically all the resources of Western Germany not available for the West, and also a very in-between Yugoslavian style Germany would have brought a lot of instability to the West, and it was also not necessary at the end of the day. And they offered it to Adenauer, but he rejected it, and the Americans rejected it as well. And so the Western Germany was allowed to join NATO and to be a full member of the West, with European Union later and with NATO membership then 55. This was historic. And it's not a coincidence that NATO membership for Western Germany and neutrality for Austria was basically happening within 20 days, from the 6th of May 55 to the 15th of May 55, when Austria signed the State Treaty. Basically, the Soviets made the neutrality of Austria in order to undermine Adenauer, the German chancellor, because they wanted to show Germany, look, Austria, we really gave the deal and we really left. But did they leave really? Politically, the Soviet Union never has left Austria. They had a huge role in Austrian politics all the time as a self-declared guardian of that neutrality. And as well, geography is like this, that Austria is like a gigantic block into Eastern Europe. When you look from the Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, so Vienna is very much to the east of Prague. And so the situation was that the Soviet Union had this northern and eastern part of Austria under occupation, but they withdrew about 40-50 kilometers only into Czechoslovakia and into Hungary. And as a tank commander from Bratislava in Slovakia, you could be in an afternoon in 2 hours back in Vienna if they would have made the decision. And they always told it to the Austrian leadership like that. If you misbehave, we are back very fast. And the Austrians always knew it. So this was neutrality for us. We were part of the free world because it was part of the Swiss role model. So the Americans insisted economically, politically, we can be democracy, market economy, but not, completely. We always had a strong role for the Soviet Union, especially in the energy sector. And we were always to fulfill the wishes of the Soviet Union, and we were always compliant when it came to a Soviet appeasement and the role of the appeasement. We had a very unfortunate role in the year 56. Immediately after neutrality was signed for Austria, the Hungarians wanted basically the same. because it was in a way a good deal also for us and for them at the time. And then the Soviets cracked down the same. And we were also very unfortunate in 68 when we touched all the issue and we somehow ducked away when our fellow neighbors of Central Europe were cracked down in the Czechoslovak uprising and the crackdown of the Warsaw Pact in 68. So Austria was at a very fragile front line. And I say 55, just fine. It was probably the only way to get freedom. And we got freedom. And this was a very important and much better life, because the Soviet occupation was terrible for the North and the East. So we got our unity, our freedom, important, and the concession of neutrality was good back then. But why exactly we kept it in 91 when the Soviet Union was breaking up? Why we kept it in 95 when we basically joined the European Union? Why we kept it that? It was only because it has taken some kind of life of its own. It made us a little bit feeling morally superior to the rest. It made us a bit feel different to Germany because we are the good guys, the neutral guys, the peaceful guys. We are basically irresponsible and immoral, and we don't participate in anything. But with 95, with the EU, we participated. So we could have long time joined the NATO as well. But we never did it because it is, of course, a contentious issue, because Austria is a hotbed of anti-Americanism, and we have a lot of foreign influence from Russia and from other countries in Austria. And so they were all against it, dead against it, and they all hated America. And so we stayed out of NATO all the time, because then was the Iraq War, the Kosovo War, and all this history of the last 25 years. And so we are still neutral today. And even in this terrible war which Russia is now doing against Ukraine, Austria is one of the few countries in Europe and in the free world which is not helping the Ukrainians with military weapons, but we only give some moral support, some money. That's also good. But in reality, we do very little for Ukraine. And that was my motivation for me to go all in, to ask for NATO membership, and to also apply for this public petition for Austria joining NATO.
All right. Well, so let's tackle the Ukrainian question. Now, I definitely understand why you want Ukraine to join NATO, and obviously there's issues that need to be dealt with before it can formally join. But I have kind of a little bit of a different question. Once all those things are, let's say that, and God willing, Ukraine does fight off the Russian invaders and is able to kind of hold its own against Russian forces on its original 2014 borders. Do you think it would be a good idea, that kind of like in accordance with the Fehlinger doctrine, that when Ukraine joins NATO and joins the EU, it also creates a federal Ukraine that could maybe lessen these kinds of ethno-linguistic tensions that Russia is exploiting and has exploited in Ukraine?
Look, first of all, I was always for Ukraine NATO membership already from 2008, and we would have saved a lot of lives and a lot of costs if we were wiser and had managed to integrate Ukraine already in 2008. That was the best idea, and we should have done back then. And I was also very much in favor of helping the Orange Revolution tear Ukraine into the European Union. But Germany and Austria didn't want it, and there was not enough consensus. So we are very much responsible for everything which happened because later in the last 15 years in Ukraine, because we rejected Ukraine's NATO and EU aspirations until 2022. And when we allowed the human integration in the historic decision in June. But then also to this day, we don't allow NATO integration. So we have transformed Ukraine in the battlefield between Russia and the West, which it is unfortunately now to high cost. Because it's very logical that the Ukrainians want to join NATO and EU, because EU is prosperity and NATO is security. And who doesn't want security and prosperity? So it's very logical. And once they want that, obviously it's much better to make clarity, because we need clear borders between Russia and the West, because only clear borders give the possibility to say, this is the border, don't cross it. And here's our deterrence tool, which is so mighty deterrence. This is the nuclear deterrence which America has built over the last 70 years, and it's powerful. We could have stopped this war. It was never necessary to have it from the beginning. And also my campaign started in 2017. We could have just integrated the free parts of Ukraine. That means without the 2015 occupied territories into the NATO and the EU, similar like we did it with Western Germany. And all these 22 wars and this 1.5 year war would not have happened. Yeah? And this is the big tragedy because of the lost opportunity from 2017 to 2022. Then Russia went in full with a military confrontation and this terrible war. We have 500,000 dead people. We have possible costs, overall possible for the Western taxpayers of 2,000 billion costs in terms of army, in terms of economic shock, energy shock, reconstruction of Ukraine, and all these other things. It's really a big disaster, and it was completely avoidable. So what we need to do now is to build a consensus for Ukraine's NATO membership. And that's very good, as we have done it for the EU membership. Because do we really want Ukraine in the EU without NATO membership? That means basically that the Europeans alone have to defend Ukraine, without America and without Canada and the United States and NATO as institutions. It's totally ridiculous. We don't have these capacities without the UK and the US. So NATO membership goes hand in hand with EU and Euro membership. This is basically like twin sisters, like brother and sister, like one family. It's like the father is NATO and the mother is the EU. And you have to go full in, and that's the family of Europe. That's our common house. And that's what we need to do right now. And the faster we do it, the faster we can stop the war. And obviously now I'm against any kind of divisions anymore. We need to liberate Ukraine fully, go full in, also with military supplies, also with much, we basically have to give everything that Ukraine needs to liberate its territory, and then immediately give Ukraine the NATO membership and tell Russia, this is the line now, this is our territory, and you better get out of it, otherwise you deal with all of us together. And they cannot, and they know that. Yeah? Russia will never attack NATO, nor the European Union, because we are about 10 times more powerful and more military capable and technology advanced, and we are about 200 times fiscally more advanced than they. So our resources are basically unlimited, and they are already at the cracking point. Militarily, they are defeated in Ukraine, and also fiscally and economically, they are crumbling. So really, it's just our own indecisiveness, our own divisions, which don't allow us complete victory, which is liberation and integration of Ukraine.
Right, and once that victory comes, and Russia more than likely starts to crumble structurally, I just want to talk about a little bit about your thoughts on decolonization of Russia. I know you've posted a bit about this. I know that when people say, oh, this region or that region, I don't think that's right, Gunther. You say, these are just proposals, and I think that's fair. There are a couple of the obviously ethnic republics in Russia. Seem like, Tatarstan, Dagestan, the Chechen Republic. I feel like it's a bit of a complicated question, because obviously these regions have a lot, and a lot more than other parts of Russia, kind of like the basis for what could become like free nations. I do worry about some of these, and this also extends to, for example, your proposals for Indian breakup, and I would say those are the two ones I would find with the most trouble, because some of these groups, like the Chechen Republic, is run by, like the Kadyrov, and now obviously I know you don't want him to be the head of a independent Chechen Republic, but I have to say it seems like it might be hard to find a real a liberal leader in some of these places. So what do we do with the alternative if we have to face it's either a kind of an illiberal authoritarian empire, but if the alternative is a bunch of unstable separatists, then I think I know what your answer is ultimately, but what would you say to allay the kind of fears people might have of, like, say, like a Chechen republic becoming a rogue state?
In principle, I'm a federalist. A federalist means that I'm for the power, for the people, for the family, for the companies, for the region, and the power should be as close as possible to the individual, to the region, to the municipality. That means for the United States, for the European Union, I'm a federalist. That means devolvement of power to the local and regional level. I'm absolutely against such things like Scottish independence, or like Catalonian independence. These are questions of federal distribution of power inside working market democracies, which have to be resolved. There's always a negotiations between the regions and between the member states and between the EU about which level of governance, at which level, which kind of budget, and all this. This is an ongoing debate in Canada, in Mexico, in all countries of the world, and it must be resolved, and it will keep us always busy because it's an ongoing negotiation process. And I have never argued for the dismantlement of any state before the Russian full-scale invasion. No, it's not exactly true. I was already in favor of Syrian dismantlement because basically it was dismantled already. But I have written a paper in 2017-18 about the future of Russia, and I've proposed a federal free Russia as a decent way forward. But here comes the point. Russia has dismantled Ukraine fully with a full-scale war, and Russia is waging a war against the world, against everybody basically. And they want to build a new world order according to Russian-Chinese outlook. So if they do such a war in Ukraine as they did, and if they want a new world order, so let's really discuss what is the nature of Russia. And then in the case of my activities, I met more people and I got involved, and I found out there's a lot of new nations potentially emerging out of Russia, and there's a lot of independence movements all over Russia, by the way, as well in China, as well in India. So I make a difference here. The most important is, of course, the management of a dissolution, dismantlement project or process of Russia. Because, of course, that's not easy, but we have done it in the case of the Soviet Union. We have done it in the case of Yugoslavia, because these people don't want to live anymore under the yoke of Moscow. Because why? Because the children are sent in a war in Ukraine and to die, and then they are underdeveloped even when Moscow is rich and Petersburg is rich. And this is a mismanagement of a central state. This is a kleptocratic system. This is an authoritarian system. It's an aggressive system, which is a danger for world peace and a danger for their own population. And once these criteria are fulfilled, there is no reason anymore for the West to support the unity of Russia. And this whole argument, it's very good to have one guy in charge of a very confusing region because we can make energy business or weapons business. We can deal with him. He handles then the Chechens. What kind of morality is behind that kind of argument? It's outrageous for me. So I say, let's support free Chechnya. Let's support free Buryatia. Let's support the freedom of Sakha, of Kaliningrad. Let's have a different name for them. Not exactly Königsberg. I'm not a revanchist. But let's have an independent Baltica state. Let's have independent Dagestan. And true, some of these places will be very unruly, and maybe there will be civil wars, and maybe there will be border conflicts. And that's why we have the experience of the ex-Yugoslavian breakup wars, and we have built all the institutions to help them to transit towards decent statehood. It's called OSCE, it's called Council of Europe. All these regions were members of the Council of Europe until 2 years ago by the Russian war. And let's put them all in the Council of Europe. Let's put them all in the OSCE, individually. Let's have OSCE mission in all the regions. Let's put them in the Regional Cooperation Council. Let's give them economic support. Let's give them a currency back to the euro, the access to the customs union of the European Union, and all these economic stabilization mechanisms, which we know very well how they work. And they bring good results for the ex-Soviet Union, for the ex-Yugoslavian state, and also for the ex-Russian states to come. So we know how to do it. It's absolutely a proven process, and it's absolutely a big risk. But, by the way, their situation, what Russia is doing, waging a full-scale war against Ukraine, and the economic and agricultural and political war against the West in general, is also very destabilizing and not very good condition for the long-term stability of the world. So my scenario is much better. We just have to learn the new countries and the new opportunities which are there for these people to be free. And it was never in the history clear that, Slovakia will be an independent country, and it is, and it works quite well. Or Kosovo, or Montenegro, or Azerbaijan. This was always between big empires, Persia and Russia, and now they are an independent country. Many of them will be complicated states, like Kazakhstan is today. I know that, but it's better to be a complicated Kazakhstan than to be an aggressive terrorist organization like Russia is today for their own people and obviously for the rest of the world. So I say, let's assist the self-dissolution. That's the more correct way, because it's not us dismantling, because me and my Twitter account will probably not dismantle Russia. I can just prepare the ones who are interested and to listen that this debate is happening, and there are a lot of people who are looking for freedom there, and we should learn these names of the places. And just because we have never heard about Kalmykia, it doesn't mean that Kalmykians are bad people. They are there, and they are nice people. I met many of them, and they really understand what is European democracy, what is freedom, and they want it. And ultimately, it's universal. Freedom, your property rights, human rights, these are universal, applicable rights which everybody intrinsically desires. It's not that this is a Western imperialist, cultural imperialism. No, it's these people who don't want to have a FSB visit in the night. It's these people who want to have freedom of expression. They want to live with their family in freedom and not in immigration or not in fear. And this is the same true for the people from Siberia as for the Chechenians and others. And sure, there will be some where it will go not so successful, as by the way in Russia, when you see the ex-Soviet Union, or in Serbia, as you see ex-Yugoslavia, or there will be more complicated states like Bosnia and like in the future freedom of Chechnya, which by the way has a very good exile government of very democratic and reasonable people. They just live in Brussels or in New York or in London or somewhere else, because in Russia obviously they cannot. And, I'm not saying that all countries who are in the hostile alliance of BRICS must be dismantled. But, I was discussing it for all of them, because I'm very shocked, by 1.5 years of war. And then India and South Africa and Brazil are thinking it funny to dance with Putin and Lavrov, genocidal guys, in this BRICS summit. And then I decided, let's at least discuss what is wrong in these countries, and let's make a little bit of a scenario of ex-India and ex-Brazil. And then I found out on Twitter that there are hundreds and thousands of activists for ex-India, and that India is really very brutal regime towards, for example, the Sikhs. Or that in Brazil, a lot of people are very unhappy with the socialist kleptocrat of Lula, and that what they are doing basically is done completely wrong. And so I started this campaign. And it had, of course, some people were unhappy with me because I criticize India and they sue me now in Punjab and all these things. But I feel perfectly legitimate, If somebody really thinks in the year 2023 in August, that was in August, to support Russia after 1.5 years of what they have done with the genocide in Mariupol and Bucha and all these wars, which are now so well documented, and where the International Criminal Court is investigating Putin for genocide. And then some of the Global South leaders think it's completely fine to be in BRICS because of the 19th century imperialism of the Americans and Europeans. Then this is for me so hypocritical that I felt totally justified to discuss their integrity and their problems internally. But I think it's always with huge cost connected. New states and the dissolution of empires and the dismantlement of empires is always with huge cost. So I'm not easily or recklessly recommending it. In Indian case or in the case of Brazil, it might be still possible to work towards a federal future of Brazil, a real OECD membership for Brazil. That's probably the more likely scenario, and even for India. But what they do at the moment is leading them very much in the wrong direction. And, why not to confront them? And because I don't need anything from them. If they want to sue me in Punjab, okay, let's do that. And if they block my Twitter account in India, I'm really very sorry. It's for me a proof that they are not really a democracy or the biggest democracy. They are maybe big in India, but certainly not big in democracy or free speech. Yeah? So that's the situation why I say we can and we should all work together for the freedom of the Russian, ex-Russian nations. 41, I say. Of course, maybe it will be 37. It is a process which is started already. And it's anyhow not to be stopped because these people, they are so angry on Putin and they strive for freedom and they will get it because no power in the world can stop a people which strives for freedom. And you have seen that in the European and in the global history. Once this is developing and once Russia is losing in Ukraine, and they will be chased out of Ukraine, there will be a big crisis of succession in Russia, and then is the moment for freedom. The Russian Spring will come, and I say no to a united, free, federal Russia, but yes to 41 new states of the ex-Russian. And then let's learn all these names and let's celebrate freedom over there. And there will be good nations, there will be good economies, and they will be totally sustainable. And they know, of course, that they have to work together regionally. And we have all the institutions ready to support the peaceful transition of this aggressive dictatorship of Russia into many, many new states. And some of them might even join the European Union and NATO. And why not? They are very welcome.
Great. Yeah, I think there's a lot Springtime of Nations can totally agree with there. I think you are right that state formation can be messy, but it's not impossible, and it's no reason to prefer kind of an authoritarian strongman regime. I agree that there's a nation that wants to be free is basically an unstoppable force. At least the hand of history is long, but it bends towards justice. So yes, I mean this is very much a lot that I agree with. I do want to push you a little bit when you said you don't agree with Scottish or Catalonian independence. Now, from a prudential standpoint, I think it's totally fine to prefer that they stay within their constituent, countries. But if there were, and in Scotland, for example, I suppose this is more possible now because of constitutional differences. But if Scotland was really 55% or 60% of the Scottish people did want to leave, I'm sure you would say that they should be allowed to.
Look, no. I'm very much deeply involved in the Scottish and Catalonian debates here, and I say no. Why? Because this is really every new organization of states, every breakaway or dismantling has huge transaction costs. There are a lot of people that are unhappy as well. And why should you do that? Yeah. Why should we somehow support the independence of Catalonia? These are so-called luxury independence movements. There is no kind of human rights violation in the European Union member state of Spain. It's completely ridiculous, yeah. And they have a federal issue here. They can discuss about the distribution of powers, of money, who votes for whom, and how they call themselves, and the respect for the languages and the cultural institutions. But there is, when we go into this historic arguments, Franco, or the 19th century suppression or something like this, we could dissolve all the states of the world. It's completely ridiculous. There is no injustice in Catalonia because that's a member of the Council of Europe and of the European Union and of NATO. And if there is one, there is the rule of law to remedy or a political process to improve the federal situation of the Catalonians and the Andalusians and the Basques. So here is my point as well for the Scottish. I was very much against that because in reality, these are just these projects, these kind of political movements are very much funded by Russia because Russia, without any hesitation, invites them to Moscow, who supports them in their media outlets, and funds, of course, these open wounds of our institutional setups, because for historic reasons, there are these wounds from Northern Ireland, all these unsettled issues, or like we can discuss as well, Israel. But that's what Russia, of course, knows very well, where the West has these weak points, and they put money and media attention and their operatives into these issues. So ultimately, when you ask me if I support any of this, in the EU and in the UK or in America or in a free nation which is developed already and which has a democratic process to improve itself and to find a new balance between the state and the nation, I think this is all not necessary. No, there's no justification, because there are so and so many English people living in Scotland or Spanish people in Catalonia and so on and so on. This is a huge cost. And why should we have this kind of cost? Just, because of some historic injustice? You know how much historic injustice is there in the world? You can have wonderful debates about recovering Poland for Germany or whatever kind of, you can have any debate in Europe. No, if you ask me seriously, I'm absolutely against all this luxury nationalistic kind of separatist things. And I'm actually accusing them of taking Russian money, which in the case of the S&P in Sweden and this Guinness, it's now very well documented, and so on and so on. So this is luxury movements which we don't need. These are often opponents funded by our hostile alliances and our opponents, and I'm very much against them.
All right. Well, thank you for that response. I think we will start wrapping up. So I think I know your answer to this, given your previous one, but I just wondered, I watched several of your videos. One of them was about South Tyrol. Actually, I think a couple were, but I watched one. And if I recall, I think, okay, so you support the rights of the Austrians in South Tyrol, but given what you just said to me regarding like Scotland and Catalonia, you do not believe that the accession of South Tyrol to Austria would be a necessary remedy to whatever concerns Austrians have.
I love South Tyrol. I've been often there, and I'm also very knowledgeable about their history. And I just can say, obviously this is a role model for how minority issues in the European Union, in NATO countries, should be settled peacefully. It was very complicated and it was very emotional issue between Italy and Austria, and we managed to have a peaceful process inside the EU, inside with NATO help and with UN help and a lot of processes bilaterally, and it's now a typical and very good role model for all of these minority issues. Obviously, I'm completely against changing borders in the European Union and NATO countries. So I'm completely against South Tyrol, even theoretically thinking about joining Austria. We don't want it. The Italians don't want it. The South Tyroleans don't want it. What I think is very good thing to have, obviously, is this autonomy status. They call it like this. But in fact, it's a form of federalism inside Italy, inside the European Union. Of course, they have a representation office in Brussels. They have special rights in Austria, and they have special rights in Italy, and that's quite good, I think it's very good. I think Italy in general would be much better if they would be a federal state. And one of the big problems of Italy is, for example, because a country which is as big and as diverse as Italy, and by the way, very beautiful country, should have economic governance and political governance from Sicily to Milano on a very decentralized federalist level. And this is very good, and it would work much better, because economically Italy in general is a real big issue for Europe, with high debts and with low growth and not a real big prosperity despite massive transfers. And one of the biggest problems of Italy is the lack of a really federalist structure of economic self-governance of the local level, and of transparent good governance in many of the regions, which unfortunately have this mixed system of centralistic and regional lack of transparency. And I think South Tyrol, there's a big reason why it is the richest region, to my knowledge, inside Italy. And it's not because the German speakers work more or something. It's because they have a good economic governance there, because they have all these devolved rights of economic and political self-governance in South Tyrol. And that's why also a lot of Italians moved there, because there are jobs and there's prosperity. And we have a rich peace in this wonderful example. And that was also my role model for many of the regions in Eastern Europe. Sorry. Unfortunately, this is not often achievable. And then you have it by the sword, like in this terrible case which we had now with the Armenians in Azerbaijan. And I was calling for hundreds of times on Twitter for a settlement like South Tyrol inside of Azerbaijan for the Nagorno-Karabakh people. But no, the Armenians didn't want it, the Nagorno-Karabakh people didn't want it, and the Azeris didn't want it. And now they have solved it militarily by the sword, and Russia has taken basically complicity in this ethnic expulsion of the Armenians from Azerbaijan. And that's really the worst example for how you can settle minority issues in Europe in 23. And I'm very sorry for the Armenians who are now refugees. We could have done easily a decent process like South Tyrol inside of Azerbaijan, and that's what I'm calling, by the way, for the north of Kosovo, the south of Serbia, and many of these regions. But I say regions, like they have economic self-governance, they cannot have a veto on foreign policy, because the South Tyroleans have no power to say, oh, Italy should not be in NATO or something like this. Like we had it given, unfortunately, to the Bosnian Serbs in Bosnia. And that's a wrong example for how regional self-governance has to work. And the South Tyrolean Alto Adige example is one of the best role models for the settlement of minority issues inside the free society, and I applaud them.
All right. Well, Gunther, thank you for your time. I asked you for an hour, and I think we had a very, very productive and interesting discussion. We'll be sure to send you a link when we put this on our channel.
Thanks a lot. I'm very happy to be on these issues. When you want to have a debate about the Middle East, about Palestine, Israel, Syria, Iran, I have many interesting points here, but that's for another podcast. I want to thank you very much for this invitation, and please support the freedom of the ex-Russian nations and learn all the 41 new states. It's a lot, it's mind-boggling, but it's for everybody who is interested in the nationhood of captive nations. Please learn the names of Buryatia and of Chechnya, and there will be wonderful free nations of this world in the coming decade, and please support them wherever you are.
All right. Thank you, Gunther. And may 1,000 flowers bloom.
Let's hope for that.
All right.
Best regards from ex-Austria.